Hello and welcome to the Photo Bar, the podcast talking all about the business and lifestyle of photography while drinking beer. This is episode number 1, Photography is My Passion. Hey guys and welcome. My name is Matt Druin and my goal of this podcast is to help you become a better person, a better photographer, and a better entrepreneur. Since this is the very first episode of this podcast, I figured I would use it as an introduction to talk about who I am, what I do, why I even started this podcast, and what you guys can expect going forward. So I guess we'll start out with what it is I actually photograph. I'm a wedding, portrait, and editorial photographer based in Atlanta, Georgia, and I specialize in destination weddings and fashion editorial focusing mostly on women. I've been a full-time photographer making all my income from photography for the last 6 years, and how I got into photography was actually a total accident. About 6 years ago, I was actually in college studying finance because I wanted to be a personal financial coach, and then I ended up switching majors into art, focusing on graphic design. And we had to get a camera to take photos of our different work and art for our portfolios, so I traded a toolbox on Craigslist for a new Nikon D3000 on Craigslist, which at the time I guess was probably worth about $400. But needless to say, I really love technology and I fell in love with all these buttons and stuff that the camera had, and I started taking pictures of my dogs and then some squirrels, my friends, and then that kind of led to my first paying job, which was $20 and a pack of gum. I know, big baller, right? And then from there, I kind of came home and I told my wife that I felt I really wanted to be a full-time professional photographer, and kind of naively going into it, I thought it was just going to be pretty easy to hop in and create this business and somehow start making a full-time living off this. So my wife was pretty supportive, and she said, give it a few months and see if I still like it, and then after that, maybe try to build up a clientele before I just totally quit everything else and focused on photography. So 2 weeks later or so, I came home from school one day and told my wife I had quit my job and dropped out of school. And of course, she thought I was crazy, and she's like, well, how are we going to pay bills? And I said, I got this. I'm going to pay it with this camera. Again, this is how naive I was to this whole starting a photography business. I decided I was going to get this camera, I was going to start taking some photos, and all of a sudden, I'm going to start making a full-time living. I checked with some of the my bill companies, and come to find out they don't actually accept gum as a form of payment. So I had to figure out something else. I was practicing all the time and shooting portraits and basically doing anything anybody would hire me for. So after owning this camera for about 4 or 5 months, a friend of a friend kind of introduced me and said that they were getting married and they had zero budget for a photographer, but they'd be willing to pay me something if I would photograph their wedding. And of course, I told them up front that I had no clue what it is that I was doing with this camera or even weddings. I didn't know anything about weddings. But they agreed anyways, and they ended up paying me $600 to shoot my very first wedding. And from there, I had to figure out how to shoot this wedding. Of course, I'm doing all the research I could. I was going to the rehearsal, and I also had to rent camera equipment because I had nothing else except for this D3000 and a 50mm lens. So I photographed the wedding, and it turned out amazing, actually. And from there, I really fell in love with weddings. Just to be clear, the wedding was amazing, not necessarily the photography. I really loved the storytelling aspect and really actually enjoyed the whole chaos of the day. I thrive very well in high-paced, high-stress situations, so it was a really good fit for my personality style as well. That particular wedding, I didn't really make hardly any money by the time I rented gear and everything else, but it gave me my first jump into wedding photography, and it gave me some sort of portfolio to at least start with. From that point, I started really working on trying to get referrals. So from their friends, and then after I shot a few of those weddings, and then more friends, and by the end of the year, I ended up shooting about 20 weddings and built a really solid portfolio to kind of go into the following year with and be able to raise my prices to actually start making more of an income. The whole first year was pretty rough. I actually didn't really make that much money, so it seemed like I was doing a lot of work and I was kind of bringing in money. But by the time tax season came around, comes to find out I really only made about $10,000, and the majority of that actually got reinvested back into the business for equipment and advertising and other things I was trying to do in order to get more business. Luckily for us at that time, we didn't have kids or anything like that, and we had saved up a lot of money, so I was able to really take off from working a normal 9-to-5 job and focus strictly on learning photography and the business of photography, and still have money to fall back on. So I wouldn't recommend how I got into wedding photography to anybody else. So don't go out there and quit your job and quit school and tell your significant other that you're going to become a professional photographer overnight, because that may not go over quite as well. On the other hand, if you're young and have no real responsibilities, maybe you're still living with your parents or something like that, right now is the perfect opportunity for you. So take advantage of it, because as you get older and more responsibilities and more bills and things, you don't really have as much a luxury. So I say all this like it was some really easy thing to do and I just get all these referrals and stuff, but it really wasn't like that. I was working 60 to 80 hours a week all the time, learning how to use my camera, practicing, taking any jobs I possibly could, working on my website, working on social media. It was just nonstop work. I would literally talk to anybody, pass out a business card to anybody, and do anything I could to get my name out there and to start getting referrals, start getting business, and start making money, because I was trying to really build something up for the next year and get something established. The following year is when I really got into editorial photography. I've always loved magazines and advertising, and mostly a lot of stuff that revolves around the fashion industry. And so I really started trying to pursue connections within the editorial area and sending out emails and trying to really get a hold of anybody I could show my portfolio to, just to give me my very first opportunity. To be completely honest, editorial is not big money, but I love it because it's something I really enjoy, and I make a lot of really good connections of people in pretty high places that turn into other types of work for me later on, like headshots or potentially weddings or other jobs that do pay a lot more money. This second year is also when I really got into destination weddings. Both of my parents are in the Army, so as I was young, we traveled all the time. Usually every 6 months to a year or so, we were moving to a different state and a different location. So I just fell in love with traveling as a kid. Then I started traveling a lot on my own through skateboarding. I grew up my whole life skateboarding, amateur and semi-pro, and I would just travel around to different cities and different states, just kind of living wherever I want to live, wherever the adventure was, and just skateboarding and making a living off that. So I really want to bring that type of travel and lifestyle back into my life through my work, and destination weddings seemed like the ideal thing to do. But I was left with a problem on trying to figure out how to get somebody to actually hire me for a destination wedding when I've never even done one before. So I knew pretty much nobody was going to hire me to go to their destination wedding when I had no way to prove my credibility or my ability to even travel or deal with a destination wedding. So after thinking for a while and trying to figure out a way to actually get some sort of portfolio together to be able to advertise work as a destination wedding photographer, the best thing that I came up with was to give it away for free. You're probably thinking, what, you're going to do free work? Yeah, that's exactly what I did. I looked for couples that were going to very specific locations that were my quote-unquote ideal client, and I finally selected just one client that happened to be going to Puerto Rico for their wedding. So I offered them free wedding photography, completely free, in exchange for all my travel expenses covered. The idea was to use all this work in my portfolio, but also to use it as marketing on my blog and social media and everywhere else to be able to advertise myself as a destination wedding photographer. After I did that very first wedding and really started marketing all that material, I started booking other destination weddings. They weren't all in crazy places like Puerto Rico, but maybe they were in Tennessee or South Carolina or Florida or surrounding states. And those were all destination weddings, at least to me. So I was able to start using that material to keep marketing as a destination wedding photographer, so eventually about 70% of all my weddings these days are destination weddings. And with destination weddings also comes destination engagement sessions. So people will hire me a lot for their destination wedding, but then also fly me out to wherever they are, or maybe we meet in other states, or maybe somewhere they've always wanted to travel to for their destination engagement. Maybe you're thinking at this point, hey, I want to be a destination wedding photographer. It sounds like a very glamorous lifestyle. But I think we'll do a podcast on that one day about the pros and cons of destination weddings, because it's not all it's cracked up to be. And it's actually a lot more work than just being a regular local photographer. On that note, I think I'll also do a podcast episode on whether or not you should do free work, since that seems to be a really hot topic within our industry, is whether you should work for free or not. And a lot of people think that, offering free stuff is really bringing down our industry, quote unquote. And I'll tell you my thoughts and opinions on it and maybe some ways that you could potentially use free work to your benefit. I guess that wraps up about me and my background, but if you feel like I missed something or you have questions about anything, feel free to reach out, and I'll be glad to answer any questions or maybe air something on the next podcast about it. So I guess we'll just move on to why I even decided to start this podcast. So I'm a podcast junkie. I will listen to 4 to 6 hours of podcast every day, maybe even 8 hours. I like to listen to podcasts while I'm working around the house, back in the floor, doing the dishes. Maybe I'm editing photos or driving a car, whatever it is. I like to listen to podcasts and learn and grow as a photographer, as a business owner, as a person. But I also like to listen to fun stuff like things on murder and science and just how things work and really any other kind of nerd tech stuff and SEO and things like that. Anyhow, I thought that would be the best way for me to get my thoughts out and potentially help others. When I first started photography, I couldn't find much help from really anybody, including local photographers. I feel many of them just probably looked at me as competition, so they didn't really want to help me become better and therefore compete with them. But I guess overall, I think the industry has really changed and has become much more open to helping each other. And the education space in general has become bigger, and it feels a lot more welcoming than it did when I first started, which I think is a great thing as it helps the entire industry, not just individuals, and it makes everything that much better and that much stronger. As for the whole purpose of the podcast, I'm really hoping that it does a few things. So I personally believe that we have to be great people in our personal lives, and that will transfer into our photography and also into our entrepreneurship endeavors. So we need to be able to work in all areas of our life, not just the business, not just the photography, and not just our personal life. So I really want this podcast to focus on multiple areas of our lives. And by combining all these different areas of our life, we will become better people in general, which will help us become more successful and better at our photography, as well as the business and our own personal lives. I also want this podcast to be motivational. I want it to be able to help people and to keep them motivated constantly, because we all will go through failures and setbacks within our business and within our own personal lives, but we can't let that stop us from moving forward. I also want this podcast to be beneficial to people of all stages of their photography. So whether you're just starting, whether you're an amateur, a professional, a seasoned professional, regardless how long you've been doing photography or your business for, I want something that will help everybody grow as individuals and within their own business and whatever their goals are with their photography. Overall, I really want this podcast to be a conversation between me and you. I realize that it is a podcast and I'm literally sitting in a room talking to myself essentially, but I think within the Facebook group that I have created and email, you guys can contact me, and I would love to talk to all of you about what you guys are dealing with, what your successes are, what you guys are struggling with, what questions you have, what you would like to see from the show, and a lot of this show will be dictated by you and what you guys want to hear from it. And lastly, I'm doing this podcast for me. I'm doing this as a passion project, not just to help others, but also to help myself, to keep me motivated, to keep me growing and learning new skills and trying out new things. So lastly, I guess we'll kind of talk about what you guys can expect going forward. For right now, I plan on the podcast to be bi-weekly, so it'll come out twice a month. Eventually, I would like to make it more of a weekly thing. It just really depends on how good I can get at recording these podcasts and editing them and getting them out with my schedule and traveling and everything else that I'm doing. But it's a challenge for me, and this is not as easy as I thought it was going to be. For some reason, I just had it in my mind, kind of like the photography thing when I started, that I was going to buy some equipment, I'm going to throw some stuff out and talk, and it's not as easy as I thought, especially the talking part. It's just really weird to sit in a room by yourself and basically just talk to yourself and there's nobody here to listen. So quite honestly, that's probably been one of my biggest struggles, is just dealing with that weird factor and trying not to make it sound so monotone to where it sounds like I'm narrating some book and people are falling asleep. Hopefully at this point you're still awake. As of this recording, this is probably try number 48,000 or something, and it's still not sounding as well as I thought it was going to, but it's getting better. As far as what the content of the show will mostly be, I plan on it being just a variety of stuff relating to personal and business life. And it could be things like how-to tips, maybe top 10 lists, of things to do or things to avoid, motivation, and we'll have interviews with other people within the industry and with outside of the industry. Of course, I'll be talking about my own personal life and my own personal photography business and what's happening with all that. So maybe there's a lot that you can learn from what I'm kind of going through as well. Most importantly, I want to be dedicated to answering your questions. So I created a Facebook group, and I would love for you to come join. It's facebook.com/groups/PhotoBar podcast, or you can just use the search field and type in PhotoBar podcast, and it should pop up in there. If you want to check out my work, you can visit my website at matthewdruin.com. My Instagram is @MattDruin. Twitter is @MatthewDruin, and Facebook is at facebook.com/MatthewDruinPhotography. Clearly, this is all new to me, so the show will get better, things will improve and change as we go along here, but hopefully stick with it and keep on listening. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me, and I would really appreciate it if you could also go ahead and leave a 5-star awesome review, because it's really going to help me get the podcast out there and let people find the podcast so we can have more people, which in turn will help the group become bigger and therefore make our knowledge base bigger. So go ahead and do that as well. And I guess that's going to wrap it up for this episode, but I'll talk to you guys next time.